to be in this event tonight with everybody. Welcome. So good to see you again, Denise. Hi, Lindsay. Good to see you again. Emily is joining us, and I just want to dive right in and welcome everybody here to our event, Yoga and Mindfulness are for Black Folks too, with my friend and my colleague and board member, Darren D. Dubose. So maybe at some point, Dee, we'll have to share our story that that I think we touched on in my podcast, but we won't start there. I do want you to tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the session tonight.
Sweet. Thank you, Athea, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm so excited to be here. Good news is, Athea, I plan to share a piece of that story in our session today. So we should have that. But I'll quickly just introduce myself before we go off into a grounding activity per custom starting off. My name is Darren Dubose. I go by D. I am originally from the South, born and raised in a very small town, which I'll get into a little bit. And I've spent time as a teacher, both in Alabama as well as Houston, as well teaching physical education as well as reading, so secondary, middle, and high school. And currently, I'm a graduate student at Michigan State University. In my research, I'm really interested in how federal education policies impact Black families, thinking about the emotional well-being and thinking about what tools can we offer, maybe yoga, maybe mindfulness, for these families to combat or just to have at their discretion. But super excited for this conversation when Athea shared the opportunity. Like, yes, I am in, and all of my learnings from some Black youth in Lansing, Michigan.
Awesome. I'm so excited to dive right in, Dee. Thank you for sharing.
Sweet. Per custom, we want to go ahead and ground ourselves into the space. So grounding yourself can be a few different things. Perhaps you are sitting down, or you're standing, or you're driving, however you're coming in. At this space, you can turn your camera off. I'm going to turn my camera off at this particular time, but feel free to do whatever you choose. And as you're grounding in, perhaps you are beginning to close your eyes and become aware of breath, allowing it to flow in and out, telling yourself that no other thing matters. You're exactly where you need to be. Allowing the breath to move in and out. Reminding that this space is exactly where you need to be, exactly at this time. Perhaps inviting an attention for this session, what you are feeling, what you're bringing in, and what you want to leave with. These grounding activities allow us an opportunity to just notice how we're coming into the space and to offer ourselves an opportunity to engage with the fullness of it. So we're going to take a big inhale. And as you're inhaling, I want you to think about that intention for the space. And on the exhale, I want you to release something maybe from your day, or maybe a worry, or maybe something that you experienced that you want to release out. And so we're going to take a big inhale. And then we're going to sigh it out of the mouth. As we sigh it out of the mouth, we can slowly perhaps open our eyes, coming back to the room. maybe feeling the fingers, becoming aware of all of the sensations in this human form. And perhaps when ready, maybe finding the option to turn your camera on and joining us back to the space. That was funny because I could not find my way back to the camera. So that was that was fun. All right. So thank you. I'm feeling really calm right now. I'm so happy that I did that because I was feeling a lot of nervousness, but I feel really, really calm right now. So I'm really grateful for that. All right, so we will go ahead and begin. So part one, I want to kind of orientate us to our time for today. So in part one, I'll be telling a little bit about who am I, my story to this work. Why did this topic become something that I'm interested in? Just side note, I took this topic from one of my favorite books, and when Athea was asking me for a session, it was the first thing that came to mind. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then part two, the meat of the session, we'll learn from a community experience that I experienced with working with Black youth in Lansing, Michigan. We'll take some lessons from that. And then we'll close out with some resources for working with Black youth, perhaps um, in your community or even across the United States. And then we'll stop and pause for questions. But I also want to make sure that this space is a conversation. So if you have questions throughout, feel free to cut me off. There's no cutting me off, but just pause because I want to make sure that this space is very inclusive of all thoughts, ideas, as we are learning together. I am also really excited to be in this space because I have not been a teacher or a leader in a space in a while, and I miss it. So it feels really, really good. So let's go ahead and get started. So part one, before I want to get started, I shared a little bit about my identity, and I'm gonna go a little deep, but I think it's very important to know who is coming into the space, and what identity shape my core values, and some lived experience of mine. I think the first one, starting from the bottom, is that I'm a lover of people. I believe that humanity, that we are our greatest strengths, and a lot of my beliefs started from the second bullet point from the bottom. That I'm from a very small town in the deep south. My town is approximately 2,000 people, so it's very rural, very small. In fact, I remember my father would pick up random strangers as a kid, and I never understood why he would pick up people as a kid. I was like, why is he picking these people up? But that has become my greatest strength of knowing that the one thing that connects us is that we, all humans, right, that we share this human connection to this space that we're on, and that we're on our own individual journeys. And so I bring that into not only my work here today, but I also bring all of those people with me wherever I go. The next one, I'm an educator by heart. I love spaces that require me to think and me to like provide a space of care and love. And I'm also a mentor. This starts from my work as a teacher, and as an organizer, as an advisor. The list goes on, but um, I take this badge of honor that I work with um, students, and I constantly think about students, either past, present, and or future students. I'm a yogi. I not only I practice yoga, I live a yogic lifestyle. Yeah, a lot of presence, a lot of like deep breathing. It's so funny. A situation happened 30 minutes before the call. Took some breaths. It's like we have a session. We're gonna get there. So yeah, I've committed myself to this lifestyle, and it has been really, really beautiful. And then the last one, I'm a lifelong learner. Um, I believe that I want to constantly change and constantly grow. And so I take opportunities to learn. So as you know, I'm a graduate student currently. And throughout my life, I've always been in this space of always wanting to know more, always. And so I take these things um, as values of core values, and they impact my my overall world and my worldview. But before we get started, this quote by Miriam that states, "You can't be what you can't see," is a quote that, um, on the one hand, I really thought a lot about this quote when putting this session together. Because on the one hand, while this was very true for the start of my life, um, with me growing up in a very rural space, in a very small town, and seeing Black men and Black people at the time only talk about work, or perhaps only, talked about sports or engaged in different activities. um, that I think the later part of my life began to question, well, what if perhaps I could be open and not see what's on the other side? And perhaps what if I don't necessarily have this opportunity, or I can't see anyone in front of me, but I am interested and I am open for this opportunity. Let me tell you a little bit more about this. So, as a Black boy in the South, I wanted to be three things growing up. Three things that I saw was the University of Alabama football. I wanted to be a running back, a wide receiver for the University of Alabama Roll Tide. In fact, I knew everyone on the University of Alabama football team, from the head coach to the folks that we were scouting and recruiting. My dad, actually, he knew it, and so I was like, I want to be like my father. The second thing, right? I wanted to be like Michael Jordan, right? Wanted to play basketball. I was on a basketball team for 2 to 3 years, and remember when I got my shoes, I would run through the house, and my sister would be like, "What is this guy doing?" But I was committed, right? That these things that I had saw on television, or saw my father or my family praise, and like the things that thought were true at that particular time, and still in so many lanes were true and are true. Those things I wanted to do. And the last thing, I wanted to be a minister. I wanted to be a preacher. I remember going to church every Sunday and leaving church preaching the same message that I heard that particular Sunday to my mom. And if I didn't have no other cheerleaders, I had her to amen and say, keep on preaching, right? No matter what I was saying. And so while I think about this quote, I think the first part of my life will say, yes, absolutely, right? You can't be what you can't see. Because these were the things that I saw in my life that guided my life and took me for an opportunity to actually maximize and do these opportunities. But there was always something in the back of my mind was saying, but is this really life? I remember graduating and saying, is this all? Is there more? And so I began to become open. And so I think the first piece of thing on my journey that opened me up was I wanted to become open to not only the experiences of my family and the cultural and the traditions of what it meant to live in rural Alabama, but I also wanted to be open to this nature of what if I haven't seen this, but what about more? And I think that brings me to the point about taking steps. So I took a step and I enrolled as a student at Alabama State University and HBCU, had an opportunity to see the best and the most beautiful Black women I've ever seen in my life. I took a step. I began to get involved in student government association and Kappa Alpha Psi, my noble fraternity. I took a step. I went to Texas, came out to College Station, and became a graduate student at Texas A&M University, the Bush School. I took another step. not knowing where I was going, just taking steps. Didn't know anything about a flight. They were like, "Oh, we're gonna fly you to DC." Oh, okay, I don't know how to work it. Took a step. Went to Washington DC. Worked on Capitol Hill for 2 summers at a time. Took another step and said, "Wait a minute. I like taking steps. I don't know what's on the other side, but let me keep taking steps. And I'm going somewhere with this. And it's going to tie into where we're going." And I joined Teach for America. I see you, Byron. One of my Teach for America colleagues is here. Took a step and joined Teach for America in Houston, where I met Athea, met so many beautiful, bright young students, and would change me in so many ways. Took another step, moved across the country again, not knowing the soul at Michigan State, not knowing what this opportunity, and still don't know what this opportunity upholds, but I'm in it and I'm in the thick of it. And finally, took a step with yoga and meditation, mindfulness, not knowing what the hell, excuse me, not knowing what it is. Took a step. Uh, and it's so funny, this story. I remember I had a white colleague at the time, Athea is who I'm referring to. And I remember she was telling me about this yoga thing, and I just was like, I don't know about this one. Like, I don't know about this step. I was like, I think yoga is like Zumba, and that's just something that I'm not trying to get with at all. And I remember needing to confirm what yoga was because I had no idea. And so I logged onto this app. You may know it. It's Twitter. It was Twitter. It's called X now. And wrote a message, do Black people practice yoga? Right. And was like waiting patiently 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And finally, I got hit back. All of my Black colleagues and my friends, in fact, one of my mentors who I looked up to was like, I did yoga last week. What are you talking about? And so I was like, okay, all right. I think I can get with this yoga thing. I mean, that still took some time to get there. But however, what I'm trying to get at is while I did not see these things as a kid, right, and I did not see these things in rural Alabama, the people in my life are slowly beginning to take steps as well because I decided in my family, because I decided to take a step. And so I think this is very, very important and very groundbreaking as we think about beliefs that we hold about something to make sure that we are grounding ourselves in allowing the universe and allowing things to take a step. But again, this is not my personal story. Let's jump into part two. One of those steps led me to a community organization in Lansing, Michigan. So Turning Point, which is a 501c3 nonprofit here in Lansing, Michigan, does the work around servicing Black and Brown male students in the greater Lansing area. So their mission is to make sure that they can provide some type of mentorship to ensure that Black boys and Brown marginalized students get the support that they need to fight against these systems that we currently fight against. And so they do incredible work. And one of these steps led to me being invited this past November to lead a yoga and meditation mindfulness training, which was extraordinary. And at this particular time, we had about 15 young men, 15 teenagers, young men who at the time were engaged about this yoga thing, and we led them through that particular thing. But before I even get into the lessons, I think the one thing that was groundbreaking was that as I was preparing for this session, the coach that reached out to me called me and said, Dubose, we're going to teach these Black boys yoga. We're going to do a sun A, we're going to do a sun B, and we're going to meditate for 30 minutes. And I was like, all right, let's do it. Sign me up, right? I'm going to lead them through. I'm going to have them doing, if you practice yoga, I'm going to have them flipping on their heads. I'm going to have them doing all of this. And I prepared for it. I had my music to the T. It was culturally relevant. I had what I was gonna say, how I was gonna get them in the pose. I remember going that day, and they were supposed to be mats. They were supposed to be everything. I remember going that day and was like, wait, we don't have mats. Wait, we don't have this. Wait, I got to shift some stuff. Not only was it the resources that I thought about my first time in a yoga class. And I thought about what I needed to have to make sure that I felt comfortable and going back to that space of asking and talking about what yoga is, right? How do I even enter this space not knowing a thing about it? And so I was like, that plan can't work. So 5 minutes prior to the session, I walked up to coach and said, I know we planned for these headstands, but they're not gonna work. We can't do headstands, and this is their first opportunity or their first gateway to this particular practice. So I shifted, and a piece of that shift came 3 particular lessons out of it. And I think before I get into the 3 lessons, I think the one thing that was important was providing the space to hear from students. So my first lesson that I learned from these young students was provide the space and don't be quick to educate immediately. Knowing that the beliefs that young folks have, right? I needed to one reconcile my own self that yes, I have information, but they also have information as well. And so the first question was, what do y'all know about yoga? How many of y'all practice yoga before? Right. And I was stunned. I was literally stunned. And I'm going to pause right here because I can't see my notes and I want to make sure that I get access. So I'm going to pause to see if I can do that because I want to make sure that I am seeing them. While I'm doing that, Athea, do you have any questions or anything?
Yeah, no questions, but there were a couple comments that I wanted to share. So since you were pausing, is it Byron? Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. So they love the quotes. Lindsay says, so powerful how by taking our own steps empowers others to take theirs. And Denise says, the power of taking a step outside your comfort zone and what you've known or seen. Absolutely. Emphasis on that. Don't be too quick to educate. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great lesson because oftentimes we go in and we have this knowledge and we're ready to deliver and execute before we really know who we're with. Even when
Absolutely.
I think even when we think we've created relationships, right? Like, so I would love for you to maybe elaborate on that a little more. You know, yeah, I'll just pause there.
Yeah. No, I think you're hitting exactly what I'm saying. Like even thinking about the relationship that we may or may not have, I think it is so important for our students and the folks that we're working with for us to build this level of trust to understand that whatever beliefs that they are safe to have those beliefs. And in so many ways, the beliefs that they have been necessarily true and confirmed in their world, right? So when I think about my life, I had not seen no one, I did not know anything about yoga. And the thing I did hear about yoga is one of the stories that I heard from my young men. And when I asked the question, who knows about yoga? He's like, oh yeah, white women do it. I was like, oh yeah, I think the same thing, right? Literally listening, not combating, not saying, well, what about me? I do yoga. Listening openly, right? And I think even in that moment, I didn't even jump in and say like, oh, me too. I just said, oh, tell me more. And once I said, tell me more, I had more students say, oh, I think it's about flexibility. Oh, I think women just do it, right? So providing that space to allow our students to kind of wrestle and like share out some of the beliefs that they have. Because I think when we think about a belief has been something that they saw, they've probably seen on television, they probably heard before, they probably passed by a yoga studio. So it was confirmed over time. And so me trying to shatter it all at once is almost like me shattering everything they know, right? And so I think like providing the space and not being quick to educate immediately is so, so important because they are also bringing in data into that space. Because in their world, they're absolutely correct. And I think even now when I think about me going back and talking about yoga to my friends, I am always having to tell me more and like allow them to share the things that are true in their world. Okay, so I think I'm gonna get to the second one, but perhaps Athea, would you mind perhaps sharing the slides by any chance?
Yes, let me do a screen share here really quick.
While you're doing that, are there any other thoughts or comments on that first particular one?
I just want to validate just the importance to be able to create that space for hearing and listening and just that nurturing space there. And then just how you had shared, like being able to shatter some of those prior beliefs, but do so in a way that then creates that empowerment piece. I just really appreciate just that viewpoint within there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Lindsay. Thank you, Athea. Lesson number two, um, it goes along with the first one, and it is affirm and listen to beliefs and or stories with an open heart. Right. And so as a former educator, I can't tell you how many times I did this when students would share stories with me. In fact, when I was a teacher, students would come and share stories related to their significant others, maybe their boyfriend cheated on them. I don't know. They would share all of these stories with me, and I would listen. I would listen to them, and I would say, "Wow, that must be really tough. Wow, that sucks." And students would leave the space, and that's the only thing I did. But students would leave the space saying, Mr. Dubose, see, that's why I love you. You get it. Like you are so helpful. You did it. And oh my God, can I come back? To the point where I had one student who would pay me by Oreos. I don't know if this was legal, Athea, or not, but she paid me daily by Oreo cookies. She would drop the Oreos off in the morning and say, "These are my Oreos. We need to talk because something happened and I want my therapy." That's what she called it. And it wasn't therapy, it was just me
I
listening and affirming.
I love that you share that because I remember many students just loving that value that you brought to them. And it really is a great reminder of the power of what it means to listen and be for others, not teaching, not giving a strategy, just being there and simply listening and affirming what they're going through.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, Athea.
And staff
Uh,
too. I mean, I don't know if you got paid in Oreos with teaching staff, but D was
yeah.
definitely a yogi before he thought he was a yogi.
Thank you, Thea. I appreciate that. Yeah, that situation got to a point where I was like, wait a minute. All right, no more Oreos, and we'll talk whenever we can talk. Because it got to a point where it was like, I'm trying to, yeah, it got to a point where she was paying for the service and I wasn't able to render the service because I had other things. But the piece of it is that is important, right? Was that affirmation and the listening piece that I think so many of our students, right? Black and brown students in particular, may not have the spaces where they are heard or listened to at home, right? And so, like, how do we create those spaces where we are listening to whatever they are saying, affirming whatever they were saying? And so, going back to the example, the tell me more, the oh, that's interesting, to allow them to like add more and more to that particular story. And so, We went from one student saying that white women only do yoga to having to spend 10 minutes because the entire group of boys kept sharing. Oh yeah, like, and it was on that video. I was like, oh really? And it got to a point where I was like, all right, I can't take any more. Like we gotta keep moving. But when I say like allowing them to express themselves in the true and their true feelings around, or their true like feelings at the time around what they assumed and what they thought, or what they came to think yoga was at that yoga, meditation, mindfulness was at that particular time. Um, and so yeah, this was something that was very important. And so that brings me to lesson number 3. Thank you, Athea. That brings me to lesson number 3. Um, and this one is get comfortable and be able to share stories with students as well. So as they're sharing stories, we also should be sharing. Is it? I think like when I think about my time there, I shared the story about Athea and I, how she invited me to yoga and how I thought it was the craziest thing under the moon. And I had them at the toe of their seats. They were waiting on the next word. And I was like, I was scared. Black people don't do yoga. I had the same thought, right? Being honest, being transparent, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and allowing them to see the humanity in me. Because I think, like, even when I think about young folks too, I think oftentimes, again, there's this I have this information, I have this level of power, right? And I'm not sharing power. I've always looked at spaces around sharing powers, especially when it comes to young folks, um, and specifically folks from marginalized backgrounds. And so I think like getting comfortable with sharing stories and understanding that as we're in this space, we're stronger together. And as you give me something, I will also give you a piece. And while I may not be able to identify directly with your story, maybe I can tell you a piece of the story that you did not necessarily think about. Because I think like while the culture of me being able to identify with majority Black students at that particular time, I do feel like if they had heard another story from a different perspective, they would have also been open. This level of vulnerability and sharing as well, and strengthening that connection as well.
You said
We
the
went
V word
from
really quick. I wanted to interject. Is that okay? Okay.
absolutely, please.
So I was like, okay, I hadn't said the V word yet, but you did. And so because you mentioned vulnerability, as you were talking, I was thinking about the connection of this idea of vulnerability and emotional safety in those spaces, right? And that when in the first lesson is just like being in that space and just being there for others and listening and not jumping into an immediate execution of I have the knowledge and that you don't. There's this there is that power dynamic that's going on too, right? Like I'm the knower, I'm teaching you, which creates a divide as well. And then when you create that space of just being and just listening, and you get comfortable, you sharing your personal stories, you have that vulnerability, you're really starting to break that power divide down. And there's more connection. I'm hoping I'm making sense. There's that element of power that sometimes gets in the way of this idea of like educator all knowing and the student that doesn't know. And it's hard sometimes to share and to be vulnerable because we have this sense of, well, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to be made fun of. Nobody's going to get it. I'm just going to get through this so I can just know and know the material. But when that person in that position of power in the room, the teacher, starts to break down that power barrier through being present and really inviting those other stories in and being vulnerable themselves, you do create that authentic connection. And then there's learning both sides happening. The teacher then becomes a student, and the student becomes a teacher too. So
Yeah, Thank you, Athea. I mean, beautifully, poetically said. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that is not only a session, I think that's a series of sessions around how do educators begin to not only see this as just a lesson in this particular session, but think about what does this mean for the work that I need to do outside of schools? And how can I um, dismantle, right, some of those beliefs around power and this ownership of power and who has power and what does it mean for um, what does it mean just for adults in certain spaces. So no, I think that's beautiful, and so I think like with that, right, like I think this is a caveat number three is like getting comfortable sharing stories with young folks or the audience and do the work, right? Like I think that is like in addition to this, because I think this one can be very tough in and of itself without having gone through or, practicing what does it mean to dismantle some of the ways in which we were taught to be. And so with that, before you move on, I think with that, I think all three of these lessons provided the space for us to get into downward dog, provided the space for us to get in downward dog, breathe in and out, come back, and the eyeballs were just fascinating. Oh my goodness, I feel something in the back of I think it's my Achilles, my hamstring. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, in fact, not only were the young guys excited, the older gentlemen who were mentoring them, some of them on canes and walkers were like, oh, let me get down. I was like, all right, ease yourself down, right? But they were getting down and they were doing the poses, right? We did a series of poses and the reflection, every pose would be like, okay, well, what did you feel? What did you experience? How was it? Oh, I'm really tight back here. Am I supposed to be tight right here? I'm like, where are you tight? Right here. How does it feel now? Oh, it feels a little better, right? And I'm seeing it go away. But the key of the factor was none of that could have happened without the creation of lesson one, providing the space just to be, lesson two, affirming the space and affirming kids and being listening with an open heart. And number three, getting comfortable and sharing the stories with young folks in the audience as well. So just like I took a step in all of those ways, in so many ways, these young folks took a step as well. And I was sharing with Athea that this particular group just received a large grant to continue their yoga, meditation, and mindfulness for 9 months. And I look forward to supporting them and working with them over the next few weeks. All right, so those are my 3 lessons. I also have here a list of resources
Well, wait,
related.
before the resources, I have another burning question. Can I?
No, take your time,
Okay,
please,
okay. Well,
because we are
first,
like move. Yeah, take your
yes,
time.
congratulations. That's amazing and so awesome that the organization received that grant and that you're involved. And just one, we'll have to have you back once you have that experience and report back how it went and give another session on learnings in that experience. But, not but and taking all these lessons that you learned from your experience with these boys and teaching them yoga and mindfulness, what do you think? Because a lot of this is about being open, curious, and vulnerability. What in the practices allowed for you as the teacher in that space to what's the word I'm looking for, to create the conditions in which these lessons could arise? Does that make sense? There's some place you were coming from, I imagine, that helped these lessons come alive in that context. Was it
Hmm.
connected to your own personal practice in any way? And if so, what was it about your personal practice, a mindfulness practice, yoga practice, that allowed for these lessons to come alive in, in your awareness?
Yeah, no, this is a really good question, Adia. I think this makes me think about the identity markers that I like first mentioned around like how I enter spaces um and one of them being the yogic lifestyle that I live and like just having beautiful beliefs about Black people and what like Black possibilities. But I think moreover, like really being invested into this this nature of care and being very gentle, right? Because I think like in so many ways, when I think about the journey that I've had with folks who have like supported me on this yoga meditation mindfulness journey, there's always been this level of care and this level of of love and gentleness. And in fact, when I when I was going through yoga teacher training, I was the only Black male in the class, and this was a whole different thing for me. Not only yoga, but I remember maybe the fourth week of doing yoga or like practicing it with yoga teacher training, like eating the meals, like doing the food, like it was intense. But I remember the fourth week, I came to the recollection that I was not breathing properly in yoga. Like I was breathing like regular. Like it was just like it wasn't the ujjayi breath, right? It was just the ujjayi is like in and out the nose. It wasn't that. It was just like I was just there. And I remember the time I shared it with my YTT instructor, Tony Thomas. She's the owner of Salt Yoga. I remember sharing it with her, like, "Hey, am I doing this thing right?" And she was like, "You're doing it. Your right is what's right to you." There was no like, "Oh, you're wrong. Like you have to get out." There was this level of care and love and gentleness, and I was like, "Wait a minute." And I remember like coming and breathing through the like breathing properly and feeling so many benefits of like, oh my goodness, like I thought I was doing this thing right, but like did I do a drug? Like what is this? And she was like, you're doing yoga, you're practicing yoga. And I think like from that experience of knowing the labor of love and gentleness and care that she provided me and so many others, right, along my journey, take that into those spaces as well of knowing that while this space may be new today, it won't necessarily be new tomorrow, right? And that the work continues for that same young person to say, yo, have you done downward dog? Downward dog is this. You think, man, yoga ain't for white people. I just did it. I meant it. Like, that's the work. That's how we propel this thing forward. It is not about me and, what I have, but rather how do we make sure that more folks are lovers of people. So that's how I would answer that question. That's really, really, really big question. Thank you. Um, so we're coming to the end, but I wanted to provide some sense of resources for Black yoga and mindfulness spaces. This is meditation spaces, but this is without me. And in fact, this comes from the owner, CEO, and founder of Black Boy Om, Danny. He is also the author of Reparations and Wholeness. Excuse the typos there. But he's a dear friend of mine, and he shared this in his latest book, Reparations and Wholeness. So on the next couple slides, feel free to either review the slides now, or maybe perhaps I can send them to you. But these are a list of organizations that either support Black yoga and mindfulness across the country, and or maybe social platforms providing resources to Black folks who are engaging in yoga, meditation, mindfulness throughout the country and throughout the country. So with that, that is all that I have. Just more resources there. Just want to make sure you have those. But I want to stop and pause for any questions. Athea, if you're talking, you're muted, love.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to, come on, there we go. But I also have the link, so I can share that when we post it in our PD library. So I can do that as well. Of course, those that are watching on demand can just take a picture as well. Thank you for sharing these resources. I love this picture. I wanted to add, as those that maybe anybody here thinking of questions, just really want to kind of underscore this idea that you were talking about throughout, like the power of openness and curiosity. Even before we had that conversation about yoga, one of your students was reading the memoir, Just Mercy. And had seen many of the students read it, and I hadn't read Just Mercy. And I said, "Hey, Dee, can I borrow a copy of the book?" And so I borrowed it, and I read it, and you made me promise that I could read it, I could borrow it. We had a conversation. And so we followed back up with a conversation and had a few walk and talks, mini coffee chats, yoga times later. And here we are again. So just it's an awesome full circle moment, because it just a great reminder that every person we come into contact with is like, we're always in the seat of teacher and student, right? And so to always have that openness and curiosity of what can I learn from this person in my space? And it takes that sense of openness to really hear that, to really not hear it in a deeper inner way, right? I hope that makes sense, but yeah. So that said, super cool to be here listening to your presentation about how yoga and mindfulness have impacted your life, and listening to you about your story and the work that you're doing now as a graduate student in Michigan, and the work that you're doing with the organization with the young Black boys that you're mentoring and teaching them yoga and mindfulness. Love it. I now want to pause and open up the floor to any questions, thoughts, wonderings from others. Lindsay says, beautiful, wonderful time together. Byron says, thank you so much for this impactful space, resources, and presentation. Thank you. So lots of gratitude. I love that. I'm going to actually stop sharing. Yep, go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay. Yeah.
Dee, I wanted to just thank you. One of the things that I have been doing for 15 years in the New York City public schools has been work with around restorative practices and restoration circles and restorative healing, and specifically to give students voice, and specifically students of color. And it's all about vulnerability. It's all about sharing personal stories. It's all about empathy and perspective taking. I do a lot of work around equity and anti-bias and anti-racism training and so on. And I just wanted to commend you, especially because you had mentioned that you haven't been in a teaching space in a while, or at least not one like this. And I wanted to commend you not only on the presentation and resources, but the course that I teach is a 30-hour course, sometimes 35-hour course, where it goes for 5 or 6 days straight, where we spend 1 day a week. If it's summertime, 1 day, 5 days the entire week. But if it's during the year, in order not to pull them out, I do 1 day a week where I spend the entire day with them doing exercises in order to train them to be able to provide the space and to facilitate the vulnerable space and work around voice and equity and making sure students feel heard, but not being able to do that without being vulnerable and sharing your own story and your own vulnerability and authenticity and openness. And so I wanted to commend you because it's something that takes, at a minimum, certainly with the trainings that I've run and that I've participated in, that take a full week to get across what you were able to communicate in 45 minutes. It's a taste of what's needed. It's not a full training, but you were able to put into those brief lessons and the brief opportunity of sharing your story and sharing your journey, and then the takeaways that you've had and how that can help be the seed that we plan to start this work with others. And so it was really refreshing to me to hear so much of that work that I've been a part of for 15 or 20 years, and to hear it be presented in a concise, meaningful way and share so many valuable resources while you're also modeling the practice, right? Because there's content, there's pedagogy, and there's practice. And you were able to put all three together into one brief 45-minute period expertly. So I just wanted to commend you on that and to thank you for that. It's so refreshing and it's so appreciated.
I love
Wow,
that.
thank you so much.
Mhm. Look, Dee, that's what you get hopping back into the teacher seat. I love it. I have a question because, and it stems kind of like from the question I asked before. This, you know, actually, I'm sorry, if you were in my brain, you'd see like all these different like neurons going to making these connections. But okay, so I want to land on this one. You said something about a gentleness and a care. And that made me think of, so when you're talking about learning how to breathe, or you didn't realize that you weren't doing the Ujjayi breath in the way that it's prescribed, right? And there was a gentleness and care that the instructor had surrounding that. Which made me think like there was no judgment. And so that made me think, how I like, again, like, what is it about certain practices or your personal practices that we take on that perhaps, do you think that allow for that gentleness and care? Do you think it's a collection of things? Do you think it's the entire like lifestyle together? But I think that's important. There's a gentleness and care to really hearing someone, even like when you're not agreeing with the other person, there's a gentleness and a care to know, to have the other person be seen. Like what I think you were describing too is like, oh, I felt seen. Cool. Like I'm not being judged. And that opens up the space to actually even share more. And that's like where the real learning happens, because we break down that power dynamic too.
Yeah,
Was
that's
there
a
a
powerful
question in
question.
there? I don't even know, but I think I tried.
I think there was a question in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful question. I would love to pose it back to
Yeah.
the rest to folks in the space to see what they think. But I think you're onto something, because I also think that as you were asking that question, I was also thinking about like the people in my core network now, in my core circle. They do that. They do that effortlessly, right?
Mm.
And they do it, and I don't know what my process has been over the last like few years. So I'll be eager to hear what other folks have to say on this.
Anybody want to share what maybe they're thinking? I have an insight, but I'm gonna.
Happy, can you just really concisely reframe the question you're posing?
Yeah. So the question is, what about the practices collectively? We're talking about this idea of yoga and mindfulness that help the help us be in the seat of gentleness and care? Is there a particular practice? Is it the whole, like, whole just lifestyle of it? The whole practice and philosophy of it? Is it just one, or, one thing, all the things? What is it about the practices that allow for that gentleness and care more often than not?
Mhm. I mean, I know for me, a big part of the practice that is so important to provide that feeling and comfort and
Mhm,
space is that sort of non-judgment, right?
mm, mhm,
It's non-competitive, it's individual, it's very personal. And some people practice yoga and it's a religious experience, other practice it as a physical experience, others practice it as a mental or emotional experience. Everybody practices it as some go for social experience, right? So,
mm,
and it could be that you're practicing it with all 5 or 6 things in mind as well, right? But it's the idea that it's very personal to you, what you put in and what you get out for yourself. And part of that is also kind of overflowing into the community,
mhm,
but it is very much about you and what you're willing to invest and what your goal is to take away, or what you experience and you take away, and that it's without judgment. It's not to compete against someone else. It's not to look like, the Lululemon white girl in the
mhm,
magazine, right? Like I'm 200-pound Puerto Rican woman that never practiced yoga, and all of a sudden I'm teaching, right? Like, because like one of the books that was so impactful to me was a book called Everybody Yoga, and it's
mhm,
written by a very large Black woman who also did not think that she was the stereotype to participate and practice and teach yoga. And it's a really powerful book because it's that non-judgment, and it's not only the non-judgment of others to you, but it's the non-judgment of yourself, right? It's that, especially as women, this shame part, right? This like body image thing, right? And all of these other things that go into like gender identity, that go into so many cultural pieces. And it's that inclusivity and that non-judgment for yourself and for others, that you can practice this however it works for you and
mhm,
however and whatever you want to get out of it. And I think for me, that's what made me feel invited into it and made me feel welcomed into that space, where normally I would have been like, and even some of my audience is still very hesitant. And some of the classes that I offer to a lot of the New York City administrators and others, they asked me, could you change the name from yoga to movement or something else? So they asked me not to use the word yoga, so I chose to use the word movement, because they said, number one, men won't come. Number two, a lot of people of color won't come. Number three, some people are going to think you're kind of doing a religious experience, and we can't do that in the school system. So I had to actually change the name of some of my offerings and presentations and sessions to make it more inclusive. And then in the description, I talk about yoga. And then the first thing I do when we get there and they register and I send them a little confirmation is that we'll touch upon some things in yoga, but that it's a
mhm.
very sort of self-adapting thing and personal thing. And for me, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I really resonated with what you said about the non-judgmental piece. I think there's probably a whole series to dive into that, the question and what you said, because I think a lot of identity issues do come up, and how we're
Mm-hmm.
conditioned and how we were raised, just who we are, right? And to me, I think about when you said non-judgmental, there's this, th- like, the nectar of the practice is this neutral observer where we're not tied to any identity. And so I
Mm-hmm.
remember for the first time not being tied to all these things that I think I am. And this idea of the neutral observer was really foreign for a long time. And then I could say, wow, like that was that was a freeing thing. And so that the insight that you were having about non-judgmental, we're coming to the practices a lot, non-judgmental. And I think that that's an important piece, non-judgmental, because you're a neutral observer. You're not saying there's no value judgment. You're just looking at it from a completely different lens, which allows for something else, like you're awakening to something else. So I think those are key. So really cool. I think we could have a whole like panel discussion on that. But Dee, I mean, it's been great. And thank you, Denise, for any shares. Anybody else before we close out tonight? I do want to say I remembered to put a form in the chat. I'm going to try to be really good at this as we get our systems more streamlined with our operations team, but it's an attendance / feedback form. So those that came tonight, you can click on that link and fill that out. We'd really appreciate it. And if you forget, we will email you a copy too. So you can just click it and open it, and that would be super awesome. But thank you, Dee, so much.
Done.
Like, I would love for you to say any closing words. Really appreciate your time, your perspective, your story, your journey, and the lessons that you shared with us tonight, and with those that'll be watching on demand in our PD library. You'll have to come back. We'll talk more about that after you have this experience. So I really look forward to this journey that you're embarking on with mindfulness and yoga and education in your communities. So, Dee, any final words?
Yeah, no, thank you, Athea. Thank you, everyone. I think the only thing I would just say is the power is within.
Yeah.
And with that, that is it. Thank y'all so much.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Good night. Bye.